Welcome to Future Economies Starboard Youth, the podcast. My name is Kevin, and today we're exploring the upskilling pathway for youth employment. And to do that, I'm joined by two incredibly amazing guests. Paul, you're the Senior Portfolio Associate from Kenya, and Emily Waters, you're the MEL, the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Manager, also from CFOE. Thank you so much for joining me today. In today's rapidly increasing job landscape, only educating young people is no longer sufficient. I think that's clear. In 2022, a UNICEF report estimated that nearly 3 in 4 young people aged 15 to 24 in 92 countries lack the emerging skills necessary for employment, showing that young people need the skills that represent employability and adaptability. The question is, how do we bridge this gap? And I think this is a question that CFOE, you're from CFOE, that you spend your days working on. Paul, I want to kick off with you. We're working closely with youth in Kenya and across Africa. That's a really nice part of your job. Yeah. How do you see the skills mismatch affecting young people and economic growth in these regions?
Thank you so much, Kevin, for having me. So skills gap is one of the major challenges that we face in the African continent. And this is because there's a significant mismatch between the education system and the demands of the job market. So formal education is seen as the best pathway to acquiring skills, but then a lot of young people are left out of this specific education system. According to the UN, 60% of young people between 15 to 17 are not in school. And even those that are in school, you find that the education system is not necessarily built for the rapid pace of technological changes that are happening. So the skills mismatch has had significant impact, and especially around employability. You have around that 4% youth unemployment rate. In 2019 alone, around 3.3 jobs were available, but then these jobs were not filled because the skills needed and the skills available did not match. Yeah. And of course, this speaks to the challenge that is there around skilling young people and ensuring that the education system is built to ensure that these young people can be able to have the necessary skills that they can be able to meet the demands of this job, so that they also remain very competitive.
Yeah, and Paul, you mentioned the rapidly changing requirements. As a young person myself, I see that every single day. But Paul, you mentioned a multifaceted problem here. The education, accessibility, and the evolving needs of industry. There's so much happening. The numbers are staggering, and it's clear that something has to change. But my question to you, what do you see as the biggest challenge? I know there's a bunch of challenges, but what do you see as the biggest of all in addressing this skills gap?
One of the primary challenges I would say we face is around the sheer scale of access. And I look at it from two perspectives. One is around population, and then the other one is around infrastructure. So if you look at population, of course, Africa has one of the highest growth rates. It is estimated, by 2030, around 47% of the global youth population will be from Africa. So that does put a lot of pressure on the education system. And then, of course, now if you look at the infrastructure bit of it, you have a lot of young people, especially in the rural areas where there is kind of inadequate infrastructure that has had significant impact around, young people accessing quality education. The other bit is, of course, very critical to CFOE, has to do with gender disparity. You have a lot of young girls who are not in school, and they cannot be able to access quality education, leave alone the tech training that they actually need to stay very competitive in these landscape. The last challenge I would say has to do with the cost of accessing quality education and tech training. So the cost around this is very high. It's very prohibitive. For example, we have 80% of young people who cannot access, cannot finish the training because they cannot be able to afford the internet cost. So I would say those are the major barriers that we have seen around skilling for young people.
Yeah, and so I think it's clear that there's plenty of challenges and barriers. But now I want to focus and switch the conversation towards solutions. Now, Emily, CFOE has been one of the projects around the world that's at the forefront of youth unemployment and decent job creation. I think you can both be proud of that. How does CFOE collaborate with local businesses to ensure training programs meet these market needs that are so important?
It's a great question. We start out, every time we start working in a country, we start out by conducting a study to understand the market there. We want to know what are the up and coming sectors and business models, what are the skills that are going to be in demand, and what are the types of jobs that young people living in these markets actually want to do. So then we look for partners where we see strong potential to bridge the gap that Paul was talking about between what employers need for the jobs of the future and the skills and ambitions of job seekers in the market. And then we offer to our partners technical assistance and co-funding to carry out projects that can help meet our goal of getting 230,000 youth into decent employment.
Oh, interesting. And as the monitoring, evaluation, and learning manager, I think you're the perfect person to ask this question. But what metrics do you use to assess the effectiveness of these initiatives? Quick test.
This one's easy. Yeah. In CFYE, we're really focused on jobs. So it's not enough to see that young people are getting training. We want to see that translate into employment. And so all of our partners need to follow up with youth over time to find out what happened after the training. And this could be getting into a wage job or getting a promotion, or maybe even starting to work as a freelancer. So we also are very interested in course completion. While it's normal for upskilling programs to have some attrition, dropout along the way, if you have dropouts, high dropout rates, it probably means that the program isn't really meeting the needs of the people that it's targeting.
Yeah.
And then beyond just counting the number of people who've completed a training, we're interested in who's getting trained. So all of our partners capture information according to gender. So they can tell us if young women are getting trained as much as young men, and if the training is as successful in getting those young women into jobs afterwards. And beyond these key metrics, we really like to see our partners capture feedback from their key stakeholders. So this is both the youth they're training and employers. And then they can use this type of information to continually improve their programs and improve their impact.
Now, Emily, thank you so much. You mentioned this feedback, and you also mentioned gender. It's quite fascinating to hear how data-driven this approach is that the CFOE is using. And I want to jump into the gender aspect of what you just mentioned. Can you share an example of how feedback that you received at CFOE led to changes, active changes in projects, especially the ones targeting young women?
Absolutely. We've seen a lot of this, actually. Many of our projects have struggled at some point with their gender targets. And so by looking at the data and trying to understand what's happening, we can find solutions to this. So we had a partner in Egypt that was training young women to work in the hospitality sector. And early on, they were having a lot of challenges getting enough young women to enroll in the program and complete the training. And so when they spoke to women about what the issues were, they found out that it was really the location of the training that was a big barrier. Yeah. Women had to travel across the city to get there, and they weren't comfortable doing that, or they weren't able to do that. So when this partner moved to the location of the training, this solved the problem. Their enrollment rates went up and their completion rates went up. So by listening to this feedback and then using it to adapt what they were doing, they were able to have much more success.
Well, that's a really good example of, not only listening, but also adapting based on the feedback that, the recipients gave. That's quite interesting to hear. I'm now curious, how do you use the data and these insights to then inform CFOE strategy and scale these programs? Is that something you do?
Absolutely. This kind of happens at two levels. So there's that partner level where we want all of our partners to really own their impact data and use it to make decisions about the program. And some of our partners don't necessarily have systems to track, job placement rates, for example, when they come and start working with us. So that's something that we work with them on. So we help them set up monitoring and evaluation systems. And our most innovative and successful partners are the ones that are continually monitoring how they're doing and using that information to refine their curriculum or fine-tune their approach or their recruitment strategy, things like this. So as a funder, we're working with over 100 partners across many different countries and contexts. And we're looking for trends and patterns about what works and what doesn't work and why. For example, within our upskilling programs, we notice that ones that are more successful tend to have certain characteristics. And these are things like having a really strong relationship with an employer that will hire the youth that are being trained, or maybe being an employer themselves in the sector where they're training youth to work. Also combining soft skills with technical skills and offering accreditations that are locally recognized. These things are important. So we look for opportunities to bring our partners together so that they can exchange with each other and learn from each other. So that's one way. And then when we're making funding decisions and when we're deciding what kinds of technical assistance to invest in, these are the kinds of insights that we consider.
Quite interesting. I think you have a really difficult job, but it's working. That's it's quite clear, that the data is playing a key role in refining and scaling these initiatives, and it's quite nice to hear that the CFOE is doing that. And Emily, continuing on to you, as someone that's seen CFOE soar since the beginning, are there any key lessons you've learned, specifically focused on the effectively reaching marginalized group? It's interesting that most of the time when we talk about youth, it's mostly the youth in the study centers, the youth that speak the language, the youth that have access to internet. But what about the youth that are marginalized, the ones facing socioeconomic barriers, the one in rural areas? Is there any key lessons that you've learned?
Definitely. I would say that it really needs to be intentional, and it needs to start with having a really deep understanding of the people that you're wanting to work with, the people that you're trying to reach, whether it's rural youth or young mothers or refugees or any group that is sort of on the margins and harder to reach. We need to understand what are their specific barriers and motivations, and then use that to design the program to take those things into account. And as CFYE, we actually offer support, human-centered design support for our implementing partners to help them really get to understand the needs of their target groups and then design accordingly. And we've seen really cool examples of how our partners have been able to work around challenges like gender norms that keep women out of certain sectors, connectivity issues like you were talking about, Paul, and other challenges. So this is a really powerful way of trying to meet the needs of marginalized youth.
That's quite interesting insights. Thank you so much, Emily. Paul, back to you. From your experience working with CFOE's partners in Kenya on the ground, what are some of the most effective strategies that you've seen throughout the years for equipping young people with the skills they need, especially looking at these high demand sectors like technology and customer service?
So Emily has already, of course, mentioned some of the partners that she has worked closely in Egypt, and I would say there are similarities in the Kenyan portfolio. I'll mention a few IPs that are doing extremely well around addressing some of the issues. The first IP that we're actually working with is called the Toolkit Skills and Innovation Hub, known as TTI. So TTI is a digital innovative social enterprise, primarily focusing on leveraging on technology to skill young people with the goal of linking them with either entrepreneurship or employment opportunities. And what the TTI does is actually very interesting, because the question that I mentioned earlier around the challenge around the rapid pace of technology, the question is, how do you leverage technology in a very traditional sector such as welding? So TTI are leveraging on cutting-edge virtual reality training. And virtual reality training virtual reality basically as a concept, is where young people are immersed into the digital landscape, where they are provided with a lifelike simulation and they're able to learn in almost a kind of real way. So they wear these very interesting virtual specs where they can be able to learn. And of course, what TTA has been able to do this is address two main issues. One, around how do you leverage or how do you integrate technology in the education system? But then, of course, how then do you also address issues around high cost of training? How do you address issues around occupational hazards? And then, of course, how then do you also address the issues around skill certification? So TTA is one of the partners that is really leveraging on technology in a very unique way. The second partner I would like to mention is called Generation Kenya. So Generation Kenya is part of a global nonprofit called Generation Program that works in 27 countries across over 8 professions. In Kenya, primarily they are working in apparel manufacturing. They're also working in digital and also customer service. And the mission for Generation Kenya is quite interesting because they want to transform the education system to employment system in a way that it can prepare, place, and support individuals into jobs that ideally they will not be able to get. So one of the most effective strategies that I have seen is how do you ensure that your employer partners or the private sector have a skin in the game. And they are working closely with private sector partners, ensuring that the private sector partners actually provide a training platform. So you have private sector organizations providing the infrastructure that is actually needed to skill these young people. They provide the machines, they provide the area that they need, and the space for ensuring that training is done for young people. So what this means is that you have young people who go through practical training. They're able to get skills that are very relevant, that they actually need to take them forward, not only to the jobs that they're actually working with employer partners, but also more broadly, give them the skills that they can pursue entrepreneurship opportunities in future. So those are just two examples. Just to kind of tease it, but yeah, as in they're very interesting, innovative approaches that are there, especially within the larger portfolio that really does give us very useful lessons.
Before we wrap up, at the end of the day, I am a young person, so I can't omit asking this question. But I want to ask a question that ties everything to each other. We've talked about navigating a job landscape and how upskilling plays a significant role, which is indeed important, especially looking at young people. Do you have any advice for young people entering the job market or for employers themselves when it comes to making sure that young people are well equipped to work? And what role do you see this private sector playing? Paul?
Yeah. So skilling sometimes is a very complex subject due to the many different aspects that tends to influence how skilling is done. If you look at the infrastructure, if you look at the population, but for the young people, one thing that I have seen really work is around leveraging on technology. So nowadays, it's very possible for you to go online and be able to access e-learning platforms that has so many subjects that address many different areas. So for any young person who is interested in upskilling themselves, I would really encourage them to take the powerful mobile phones that they have, register on any e-learning platform, because then from there you are setting yourself ready, you are ensuring that you are competitive enough, because we do know that we are living in a very competitive environment, and of course leveraging on technology and some of these platforms would really set you apart. So it will set you up for future growth. So my final word of advice, let's take average of the infrastructure that we have, especially the mobile phones. They provide the best pathway, at least for many young Africans that we have.
Yeah, I just want to jump in also, really important, but at the end of the day, also finding a job shouldn't be the end of upskilling. It should be lifelong learning, even if you are a young person under 30. So thank you so much, Paul. Emily?
Yeah, I guess on the flip side of that, my advice would be for employers, and especially employers who see talent as critical to the success of their business and of being able to scale up. And the advice would be to not be passive and not wait for the public sector or TVETs to fill the skill gaps that might be there. But you can play an active role. You can either do that by setting up your own upskilling program. We've seen a lot of our partners do that, or by working closely with an upskilling partner that fits your needs.
No, thank you so much, Paul, Emily. Those were incredible insights. So much to talk about, but at the end of the day, we do not have that much time. So I want to jump now to the conclusion. It was really interesting listening to you both, but it's quite clear that upskilling is key to not only closing the skills gap that we're fighting so hard to close, but also driving economic growth and opening opportunities for young people across the continent of Africa. Two things can happen at the same time. To our listeners, the future job market is evolving fast, faster than you would think. Whether you're a young person stepping into a workforce for the first time or an employer investing in talent, just like you pointed out, remember, what we do today truly shapes tomorrow. This was Future Economy Startup Youth. Thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.